He killed the engine. On purpose. The radio went dead. The propeller froze mid-spin. The German pilot behind him blinked in disbelief. No one in the middle of a dogfight turned off their engine. And yet, the P-47 Thunderbolt ahead of him wasn't falling. It was gliding. Silent. Still. Almost waiting. A second later, the Luftwaffe fighter screamed past, overshooting its target. The American plane dropped, rolled, and came up behind him. When the guns fired again, the sky lit with fire. The hunter had become the hunted. That was the day Captain Robert S. Johnson rewrote the laws of air combat. Not with speed, but with silence. To most it looked suicidal. But for him, cutting power wasn't surrender. It was control. It was 1943, somewhere over northern France. The Luftwaffe still ruled the sky. Their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulfs outclimbed, outturned, and outgunned nearly everything the Allies could field. The Americans had just arrived with the P-47 Thunderbolt. Fast in a dive, heavy in a climb, and stubborn as a mule. Johnson's squadron called it the Jug, a flying anvil that refused to die. But that day, his luck was running out. 3 Messerschmitts circled him, closing fast. His fuel gauge dipped low. His guns were empty. Then came the moment that would enter aviation legend. Johnson closed the throttle, cut ignition, and let the big radial engine die. The roar vanished. All that was left was the whisper of wind against metal, and the scream of German engines rushing past. They thought he was hit. They thought he was finished. He restarted the engine mid-fall, pulled hard, and fired. 1 German went down in flames. The others broke away, too stunned to react. When he landed back in England, the ground crew counted 21 bullet holes in his plane. None had hit the engine. Someone asked how he'd survived. Johnson simply said, "Sometimes the fastest way to win is to stop moving." That was the birth of the impossible tactic, the moment a pilot discovered that silence could outfly fear. For most pilots, speed was life. That was what they'd been taught from the first day of training. Keep the throttle open, keep climbing, never slow down. The manuals said the same thing. Altitude, airspeed, and angle of attack were sacred. Lose one, and you were dead. But the sky had started to prove the manuals wrong. By 1943, American pilots were facing veterans of the Luftwaffe, men who had survived since the Battle of Britain. The Germans were masters of energy fighting, using speed to dive, strike, and climb away. Their aircraft, the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf 190, were lighter, sharper, and far more responsive. Against them, the U.S. Army Air Force sent up the P-47 Thunderbolt, the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. It climbed slow, turned wide, and needed a mile to recover from a dive. German aces mocked it, calling it the flying milk jug. But the jug had secrets its enemies didn't understand. The P-47's massive radial engine gave it extraordinary torque stability, the ability to glide cleanly even with no power. When that engine shut down, the aircraft didn't drop like a stone. It coasted like a hawk folding its wings. And in that glide, something strange happened. The P-47 could outturn its German pursuers. It defied instinct. Pilots were taught to fight by gaining energy, not losing it. Yet Johnson's maneuver proved the paradox. In a turning fight, sometimes speed was the enemy. A Luftwaffe ace could overshoot by inches and never recover. A Thunderbolt pilot coasting in silence could pivot in that heartbeat and strike. When Johnson first described it, his peers laughed. "You can't outfight someone by stopping your engine," one pilot said. Johnson smiled. "You can if he's flying faster than he can think." The myth of speed had ruled aviation for decades. But the Thunderbolt's brute weight, its stubborn momentum, and its resilience turned that myth upside down. What mattered wasn't how fast you could fly, but how fast you could change direction. That single truth would turn the air war over Europe upside down. And every pilot who heard Johnson's story began to wonder the same thing. What if the key to surviving the Luftwaffe wasn't in pushing harder, but in knowing when to stop? Every dogfight is a math problem with no mercy. Altitude, airspeed, drag, thrust, numbers that decide who lives and who doesn't. The Luftwaffe built their entire doctrine around power and precision. The Bf-109 and Fw-190 were designed to dominate vertical energy. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. Their inline engines gave them blistering acceleration and sharp control, but at the cost of forgiveness. At the edge of stall, they snapped like glass. The Americans fought with something heavier, something that didn't make sense on paper. The P-47 Thunderbolt. Its engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800, weighed nearly 3,000 pounds, more than some entire fighter planes. But it came with an unintentional advantage: inertia. That engine was a spinning mass of pure momentum. When Johnson or any Thunderbolt pilot killed power, that inertia kept the propeller moving just long enough to stabilize the aircraft. The plane didn't drop. It coasted. It absorbed the wind like a sail instead of fighting it. This created a strange aerodynamic trick called torque bleed. With the engine off, the Thunderbolt's drag decreased just enough to allow tighter control of the rudder and a shallower turn radius. Its heavy frame resisted overbanking, allowing smoother energy transitions. In short, when the P-47 went quiet, it became graceful. German fighters, by contrast, relied on continuous thrust. When they slowed, they lost lift immediately. They needed to fly fast to stay alive. A gift and a curse. Republic Aviation's engineers didn't design the Thunderbolt for this purpose. They intended it to be a high-altitude escort, not a duelist. But in the chaos of air combat, pilots like Robert S. Johnson discovered what no wind tunnel could predict. Silence could be tactical. At low altitudes, a gliding P-47 could turn 80 feet tighter than a full-power Bf-109. At medium altitudes, the glide produced an energy lag that forced German pilots to overshoot. It wasn't a trick of luck. It was physics weaponized by instinct. And that instinct was spreading. Squadron briefings started including phrases like power bleed, silent turn, and glide stall window. None of it appeared in the manuals. It lived only in the conversations between men who had survived too many ambushes. They were rewriting the book of flight, one dead engine at a time. For the first time, American pilots were learning that dominance in the air wasn't just about horsepower. It was about timing, when to climb, when to dive, and when to disappear completely. The numbers told the story of a war that was supposed to be lost in the air, until math changed it. In 1942, the Luftwaffe owned the sky. Their kill ratio over Europe stood at 3-1 in Germany's favor. The Americans were losing men faster than they could train replacements. Pilots lasted an average of 15 missions before being shot down. Then came 1944. The ratio flipped. By summer, the U.S. Army Air Force was destroying 3 German planes for every one lost. It wasn't just production, it was adaptation. And buried inside that reversal was a simple but terrifying idea: control through deceleration. Flight engineers began plotting new engagement curves. They discovered that when a P-47 Thunderbolt cut its engine at low altitude, under 10,000 feet, its turn radius tightened from 420 feet to 340 feet. Every 10 degrees of arc gained meant 1 second less exposure to enemy fire. 1 second was life or death in a sky moving at 400 miles per hour. At full throttle, the Bf-109 could outrun the P-47 by 30 mph. But in a turning circle, speed turned into liability. The faster aircraft overshot, exposing its belly or tail. A fatal mistake. Johnson called it the math of risk. Every fighter has a heartbeat, he said. When you cut power, you can hear it. By cutting his engine for just 3 seconds, he could shift from prey to predator. The Luftwaffe pilots couldn't process the sudden deceleration. Their instincts, trained for constant motion, betrayed them. Air combat films later confirmed it. The average overshoot distance after a P-47 engine cut was 70 meters. That gap gave Johnson just enough time to roll, restart, and fire. He wasn't faster, he was less predictable. The new tactic spread quietly. Commanders didn't like it. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. But field results silenced objections. For every pilot who mastered the maneuver, survival odds jumped by 40%. It wasn't magic. It was physics meeting nerve. Luftwaffe intelligence began reporting sudden loss of targets. American planes vanishing mid-turn, then reappearing behind them. The reports used one word over and over: impossible. But impossible was exactly what men like Johnson had learned to do. One engine cut at a time. The numbers didn't just show improvement, they showed a pattern of disbelief turned into doctrine. The silence that followed an engine kill wasn't fear anymore. It was calculation. The morning of June 26, 1943, started like any other patrol. The 56th Fighter Group was escorting bombers returning from a raid over northern France. The sky was clean and blue. Too clean. Captain Robert S. Johnson had a feeling it wouldn't stay that way. He flew his P-47 Thunderbolt Lucky II just below the bomber formation. Then came the call over the radio. Bandits, 3 o'clock high. 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s dropped out of the sun, their cannons flashing. The first pass shredded a B-17's wing. The bombers scattered. The escorts broke formation. Johnson rolled to intercept, but a burst of fire tore through his fuselage. Oil splattered across his canopy. His guns jammed. His plane shuddered. He was alone. The Germans circled like vultures, waiting for the kill. Johnson's instruments were dying. Engine temperature rising, oil pressure falling. He could bail out. He didn't. Instead, he did something no sane pilot would do. He closed the throttle. The roar of the R-2800 faded. The propeller slowed until it was just a blur, then stopped. The cockpit fell into eerie silence. The only sound left was wind. He watched the lead Messerschmitt overshoot, confused. The German expected the P-47 to fall. It didn't. The heavy Thunderbolt glided smooth and steady, its nose dipping just enough to bleed altitude. The second German closed in, firing wildly. Tracers hissed past Johnson's canopy. He didn't flinch. He waited. When the Bf-109 passed him, too fast to correct, Johnson flipped the ignition back on. The big radial engine coughed once, twice, then screamed back to life. The German pilot never saw the turn coming. Johnson pulled into a high G roll, came up behind him and opened fire. The first burst hit dead center. The Messerschmitt erupted in smoke. The other two fled. Johnson limped home with holes through both wings. Half his controls shot away. When he landed in England, his crew chief counted 21 bullet holes in the fuselage, and not a single engine failure. Reporters later asked him what possessed him to shut his engine off mid-fight. He smiled. Because it was the only thing I hadn't tried yet. His commander, Colonel Hubert Zemke, called him insane until they saw the gun camera footage. The maneuver worked because it broke every expectation. The Germans relied on power. The Americans had learned to weaponize stillness. Word spread fast. Pilots in the 56th Fighter Group began whispering about Johnson's trick. Some called it the silent turn, others the dead glide. The idea was simple. Remove your own noise and let the enemy outrun your silence. By the next month, at least 5 pilots had used the maneuver in combat, each returning home alive. In the thin air over Europe, silence had become a new kind of weapon. By late 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had stopped calling the engine kill a stunt. It had become something else, a philosophy. Pilots started to think in equations instead of instincts. They called it the doctrine of energy. The belief that every second of throttle, every foot of altitude, every fraction of drag could be measured, saved, and weaponized. Before Johnson, dogfights were chaos. Throttle up, pull hard, spray bullets, hope for luck. After Johnson, every maneuver became math. Energy meant life. Waste meant death. The Germans flew by reflex. The Americans began to fly by ratio. Colonel Zemke drilled it into every new pilot. Altitude is the bank, speed is the currency, spend it wisely. And the strangest lesson of all, sometimes the smartest way to save energy was to lose it. By cutting the engine, a pilot could force a pursuer to overshoot, trading speed for position, momentum for control. A 3-second silence could flip the geometry of a fight. It defied logic, but it worked. Flight instructors began building training modules around the theory. They used chalkboards drawing curves of pursuit arcs and energy loops. The line that mattered most wasn't the fastest one. It was the one that ended behind your opponent's tail. For the Luftwaffe, this was a nightmare. Their entire doctrine depended on momentum and engine power. They couldn't adapt fast enough. The American fighters, once mocked for their weight, were now turning their mass into an advantage. Every new pilot in the 56th learned the same unspoken truth. Control wasn't about going faster. It was about knowing when to stop pushing. In the chaos of air combat, that mindset changed everything. A silent second became a weapon. A drop in throttle became a trap. The sky had become a chessboard, and Johnson had taught them how to play it in slow motion. January 1944. The 56th Fighter Group was escorting B-17s over western Germany. The air was thin, brittle, and blue. Below, the world looked peaceful, a lie only pilots could see through. Lieutenant Wayne Blickenstaff, one of Johnson's younger pilots, was flying his third mission. He had heard the stories, the engine kill, the silent turn, the insane maneuver that supposedly saved Johnson's life. He didn't believe it, until that day. At 20,000 feet, a swarm of Focke-Wulf 190s struck the bomber formation. The first pass tore through the escorts, scattering them. Blickenstaff broke left trying to climb, but a 190 latched onto his tail. The German pilot was good, disciplined, patient. He matched every move Blickenstaff made. The tracers crept closer. Too close, Blickenstaff muttered. His oxygen mask fogged. His pulse was thunder. He remembered Johnson's words in the mess hall weeks earlier. If he's faster, make him think you're falling. It sounded ridiculous then. Now it was all he had left. He pulled the throttle to 0. The roar vanished. The propeller slowed, then stopped. The 190 pilot saw it and hesitated. No smoke, no explosion, just silence. Blickenstaff eased the stick, feeling the heavy Thunderbolt glide into a gentle dive. The German fighter overshot, his gun still firing into empty sky. In that instant, Blickenstaff reignited the engine. The R-2800 came alive with a violent growl. He pulled into a tight climbing turn, rolled over, and dove on the 190. One burst, one kill. Jesus, he whispered, it worked. He rejoined formation minutes later, heart still pounding, fuel gauge dipping low. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. You crazy bastard. Did you just stop your engine? Blickenstaff laughed shakily. Only for a second. When they returned to base, he told the story over coffee. The room fell silent. No one mocked the idea anymore. By the next week, several pilots had begun practicing controlled power cuts during training flights. They learned the balance, how long you could glide before losing altitude, how to time the restart. One instructor wrote in his notes, "The maneuver requires nerve beyond training, but those who can master it survive." The Army never added it to the official manual, but the men did, in grease pencil on cockpit dashboards. 3 seconds of silence can save your life. That night, Blickenstaff found Johnson in the hangar checking bullet holes on his plane. I tried it, he said quietly. You were right. Johnson didn't look up. He just smiled. I'm glad you listened when the sky went quiet. December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge. The skies over the Ardennes were chaos. Cloud cover low, visibility worse, and the Luftwaffe throwing everything it had left into the fight. Captain Robert S. Johnson had been grounded with injuries. His replacement flight leader, Lieutenant Jim Warren, led 12 P-47s into the storm to hunt German armor columns. They never expected to meet the enemy at full strength. At 14,000 feet, the clouds broke. 20 Focke-Wulf 190s appeared above them. The ambush was instant. Tracers tore through the formation. Radio chatter dissolved into screams. Warren ordered a break. "Split pairs, don't climb, dive." But the Germans had already bracketed them, diving faster than the Thunderbolts could react. Two pilots, both rookies, panicked. One shouted, "They're on me! I can't shake them!" The other tried to pull away, full throttle, engine screaming red line. Warren saw it too late. The first pilot stalled from over-control. His wingtip clipped the airflow, and he spun out, disappearing into the cloud. The second cut his throttle completely, too slow, too early, and the heavy P-47 snapped into a flat spin. Neither survived. Below, the dogfight became a storm of metal. Warren remembered Johnson's old words scrawled in chalk on the squadron board. "The sky rewards nerve, not panic." He took a breath and did the unthinkable. He killed the engine. The cockpit fell silent. The 190 behind him hesitated. To the German, it looked like another victim falling. Warren counted to 3. He rolled right, hard, feeling the G-forces crush his chest. The Thunderbolt arced under the enemy's line of sight, gliding like a ghost through the cloud. The German overshot. "Now," Warren whispered, reigniting the engine. The propeller screamed. The power slammed him back into his seat. He came up behind the German and fired. 2 short bursts. The 190 exploded in a spiral of flame and smoke. By the end of that mission, only 7 of the 12 Thunderbolts made it home. But the survivors carried back more than combat reports. They carried proof. The maneuver worked, but only when executed with perfect nerve and timing. A second too long, and you fell out of the sky. A second too soon, and you became a target. Warren wrote in his diary that night, "The math is cruel. 3 seconds of silence can save you, or kill you twice as fast." The air doesn't forgive miscalculations. When Johnson read that entry months later, he underlined one phrase in red pencil. Physics met fear, and fear lost. Cutting the engine in a dogfight was never doctrine. It was desperation turned into art, madness wrapped in calculation. The maneuver had no name in any flight manual, no line in any training guide, but among the men who had tried it and lived, it became legend. They called it the quiet turn. Robert S. Johnson never claimed to invent it. He just understood what others were too afraid to test. That control wasn't about power. It was about surrender. In a world obsessed with speed, he'd found victory in stillness. The math was simple, but merciless. The faster you moved, the narrower your margin for error. A burst of speed gave you energy. A cut of power gave you time. And in war, time was the rarest weapon of all. By the end of 1944, Luftwaffe intelligence was filing frantic reports describing American aircraft vanishing mid-maneuver. Their analysts tried to explain it as mechanical failure, engine stalling, or pilot panic. They didn't understand that what they were witnessing wasn't breakdown. It was brilliance. A P-47 in glide mode could outturn a German fighter by nearly 20% at low altitude. It could change position faster, dive cleaner, and restart its engine within 3 seconds of ignition loss. Those numbers weren't theory. They were survival written in grease, smoke, and blood. For Johnson, the lesson was clear. Courage wasn't the act of charging forward. It was the patience to wait in silence while death flew past. When he retired, he was credited with 27 aerial victories, All while flying a plane everyone said was too slow, too heavy, too clumsy to win. The Luftwaffe never solved the paradox he created. Because you can train for speed, you can predict aggression, but you can't outfight silence. In the end, the sound that terrified the Luftwaffe wasn't the roar of engines. It was their sudden absence. Robert S. Johnson proved that even in the mechanical age, instinct could outthink technology. His P-47 wasn't faster or lighter or sleeker, but it taught every American pilot a single truth. The man who controls silence controls the sky. That lesson spread across the air war like wildfire. By 1944, Thunderbolt and Mustang pilots were calculating energy loss, throttle angles, and dive ratios the way gamblers calculate odds. They weren't chasing speed anymore, they were chasing efficiency. Every second of throttle, every pound of drag, every drop of fuel became part of the same equation, the math of survival.